What's up gamers, Coach Brandon here. Today we'll be talking about looking at team comps of your team and the enemy team to adjust your playstyle to every game. Even if you're selecting the same champion, every game is different in terms of how you play that champion, and that playstyle is determined by the composition of your team and the enemy team. This concept is part of what makes League such a complex game. Before we continue, Season 1 is ending at Game Gym, so please let us know in the Discord or in a comment under this video on how we've been doing and what improvements you would like to see in future seasons. Okay, let's get into it. To warm up, you should go into the practice range and pick a champion that you want to focus on for this lesson. You want to get familiar with their abilities, and you really want to practice using a few core items that are essential to the character. For example, if you're playing Sylas, you can try doing your combos with Night Harvester, and then with Everfrost, so you can feel the difference. Or if you're playing an ADC, try out the first item Kraken Slayer and first item Static Shiv. Mess around with your first item purchase for 3 to 5 minutes so you can get a feel for the power of the items and learn what situation they would be good for. You want to understand these basic concepts of your champion because we're going to be taking those skills and knowledge and use them to maximize our effectiveness in any given game and in any given situation. The first thing we want to do with our champion of choice is to adjust our playstyle and build to fit our team comp. What I mean by this is if you're playing Sylas, there are multiple ways to build him in games as he is one of the more flexible champions in terms of playstyle in the game. And understanding when to take certain runes and build certain items based on your team comp is extremely important for flexible champions like this. For example, if your team is a bunch of squishy assassins that don't really have any good engages, your playstyle for Sylas in that game should be to start fights by taking engage ults that your enemies have and using your E ability to engage into fights for your team and make space for them to do their job. Sylas can fill this engage role because of his E ability that provides him both mobility and CC. He's also able to stay alive more than other champions using his W. Finding different playstyles based on what your team needs is an extremely important adjustment to make and can win you games if you do it correctly. I recommend practicing this in ARAM or an unrated match to get the best practice. Next, we want to be able to adjust our builds and runes based on what the enemy team comp has. If the enemy team has a lot of squishy targets that deal a lot of damage, building more health and armor may be a good idea because you won't need a ton of damage to kill your squishy opponents. However, if your team has a lot of tanks and bruisers, then you may want to adjust by building the pen items earlier than you normally would. The idea that applies to adjusting your items based on enemy team comp is the same for runes. Using Sylas as an example again, if the enemy team is squishy, then you may want to build more Bruiser, taking runes like Dark Harvest for some added damage, and then building Everfrost and Zhonya's as your first two items, to give more CC lockdown and survivability against your high damage opponents. Items and runes are very flexible in League, and that is why I recommend looking at guides or asking questions in warm-up about the champion you want to learn. As soon as the last enemy champion is locked in, you want to be thinking about your build and what you may need to take to best take on the enemy, and give yourself the best chance of winning. This is a concept that isn't easy and takes a lot of time to learn, but over time you'll become a much better player by learning to adjust and adapt. Practicing this as an unrated match, I find, is the best when you play with friends when doing this, but solo queue also works if you want ranked practice. The final adjustment that you need to learn to make is adjusting based on your performance in the game. A lot of the time, people build the same items no matter how the game is going, but you really need to pick the items you are building based on how the game is going. What I mean by this is if you're ahead of your opponent, then building more aggressive items to stay ahead and make sure your opponents never catch up is a really good strategy. Building higher damage items instead of some of the safer options can ensure that your enemies can never kill you before you kill them, and because you're so far ahead, you have more gold to build those higher cost items. However, if you're behind, then building more tank items is probably the better option. This is because tank items are generally pretty cheap, so you can hit the item spikes faster than building damage items because you need less gold to finish tank items than damage items. The general rule I follow is if I'm ahead, I build to hard carry my team and go aggressive in my builds. If I'm behind, then I build more sustain to stay alive in fights, and if it's neutral, I just build the standard build that is recommended for the champ that I'm playing. You can apply this concept in unrated matches, ARAM, or the weekly rotation game mode. Again, I'm Coach Brandon, and today we went over how to adjust your playstyle and your build based on team composition and game state. I hope these concepts help you win more games, and always remember to check the Discord as we're running multiple events each week. Always remember to stay hungry, stay humble, and I'll see you next time.